Thanks everybody for joining us. We appreciate we're asking a lot of things from people at the moment, and we do appreciate you making the time. We'll try and make the best use of it with you this afternoon. The session is to basically to introduce you to the working draft of the programme plan as it's now being consulted on. It is a working draft. We expect to change quite a lot as it's developed during the consultation period, but our aim is to agree a baseline plan for the programme by the end of the year. And it's important because the programme doesn't yet have an overall plan that validates the existing official timetable, and it's important we get to that stage. But before we get into the session itself, we have a message from Rachel Clark at Ofgem, who is our programme sponsor.
Hello, I'm Rachel Clark, and I'm Deputy Director at Ofgem, with responsibility for retail systems and processes. I have been ultimately accountable for the implementation of the switching programme, which has now gone live, and I'm the Ofgem programme sponsor for market-wide half-hourly settlement. I want to take a moment to reflect on the importance of the market-wide half-hourly settlement programme and why we are keen to see it implemented as soon as is practically possible. MHHS is a vital step on the way to increasing the flexibility of the electricity system so that we can decarbonise the energy sector in the most cost-efficient way. As such, it provides an essential underpinning of our ability to meet the UK's net zero commitment. And the more efficient use of the energy system that MHHS will facilitate will help to keep the costs of energy down for all consumers. This is more important than ever before at a time when consumers and businesses are facing unprecedented electricity costs. This is why Ofgem considers it imperative that the industry should ensure that implementation of MHHS is done as quickly as possible. When we introduced obligations on all market participants to act in accordance with the transition timetable that we established in April last year, we wanted to be clear that we expect all market participants to prioritise implementation of MHHS in such a way that they can support a swift implementation. We cannot afford this programme to be held back because some parties do not appreciate the urgency for implementation. As was envisaged, the programme is now carrying out a full plan review to establish a detailed, robust, credible and achievable plan for MHHS implementation. Ofgem supports this plan review. It is essential that the programme has a considered, evidenced and robust plan that all parties can believe in and operate in accordance with. It is also essential that this plan, when finalised, delivers the quickest achievable route to implementation. In support of that, I have asked MHHSP to press all of you on what the minimum timescales are for activities and to look for all possible ways of minimising the time to go live without jeopardising the fundamental requirement for a robust, credible and achievable plan. We expect all programme participants to apply the necessary resources and the necessary priority to implementing MHHS so that this important change can be delivered as soon as possible and start delivering the expected consumer and market benefits. We look forward to continuing to work with you on this critical programme.
Okay, thanks for that. And just to briefly introduce the agenda for this. This is the deck that we provided on Monday as part of the consultation artefacts. But we thought it would be useful in this session to go through some of the ideas and thinking behind the plan to bring it to life a little bit to help the thinking in relation to the way in which you'll respond to the consultation question. So we're going to take you through this agenda, and at the end we usually have about 25 to 30 minutes for a Q&A. So if I could ask you to hold your questions until the end of the session, and then we'll have up to 30 minutes of opportunity for you to raise your hand and ask questions. It may be that as we go through the pack, we'll answer some of the questions that occur to you as we go through. So if we go to the next slide, basically we'll start with an introduction to the objectives of the planning exercise, the consultation process and the principles that we're following in developing the plan. So just to kind of support what Rachel was saying, the objectives of the exercise are to consult on and assess ways to ensure that the plan is delivered as early as possible. And also, though, of course, to form a baseline plan that can be approved by Ofgem, but on the basis of a weight of agreement from programme participants that the plan is indeed credible, robust, achievable and measurable. So we want to do that by working with industry to develop the plan. We don't seek to develop something centrally and then impose it on industry, and we're trying to learn lessons from previous programmes and involve you as early as we can in the process. So the draft that we sent out is a working plan. It's based on the information we have at the moment, the assumptions we've stated, but it's not a plan that's approved by Ofgem. And of course, basically, Rachel has outlined her expectations in relation to the exercise that we're now embarking upon. So on the next slide, just to outline the consultation process itself, as you'll be aware, there's been a kind of pre-consultation process where we've involved volunteer programme and project managers from some participants in conversations about the likely strawman plan that we put out on Monday, with the intention of getting feedback on some information that would help us knock the edges off that plan and provide something on Monday that was more recognisable to everybody. And now we're into round one of consultation, and this is the big round. Actually, this is round one is where you have an opportunity, the earliest opportunity, to influence the overall structure and shape of the plan. And this is the big opportunity. The reason we've asked you quite a lot of consultation questions at this stage is that we want you to give us basically everything you can in terms of your thinking around some of the subjects we've asked about, even if that thinking is not fully developed and you're making a lot of assumptions at this stage, as are we. We'd like you to answer the questions and state what assumptions you're using. But the focus of round one is about the high-level plan structure, the approach of the delivery, the durations of activities and the sequencing, and testing the high-level assumptions and related risks. Is not about a focus on absolute dates at this stage. The dates will come out of the process of round one and the consideration of feedback, and into the kind of more settled plan to start the consultation round two. Round two will be more refinement and polishing and adjusting of a plan which has dates in it and more clarity in some of the detail, and the full arrayed summary to support it. And then round three, subject to PSG agreeing next week, there was a request from the large suppliers constituency that we added a separate round three, which would be 2 weeks of final consultation post M5 being passed, the baseline design being agreed, just to provide a certain amount of check by exception on anything in the plan that might be subject to being changed as a result of the baseline design. We don't expect there to be particular changes to be reviewed in round three, but it's there as a safety net. So just to reinforce the fact that the effort needs to go into round one. We recognise there's a lot going on. There's holiday season. You're also trying to get your minds around the design, and all of the artifacts on the design will have been out by next Monday, is the current plan. So you'll have all those in your possession, but there's a lot of stuff to consume over the coming weeks. But we really wanted to give you the earliest opportunity to influence the plan before it becomes too settled, and that's the reason we've done it in this way. The next slide is just a summary of the principles that we are trying to follow, and certainly the one I draw your attention to is industry shaped. As I say, we are looking for you to help us shape this plan, and your inputs at this stage are really important. But people have seen the slide before. I'm not going to go into any great detail on it at this stage. The next section of the presentation is terminology. We've found in these sessions that most people are familiar with the terminology, but we have had a few people who've appreciated understanding more about this or getting a clarification of terminology. So we've got a couple of slides on this subject. The first one is in relation to control points in the plan. These basically are demarcation points between big phases in the programme. So for example, between the DBT phase and the integration testing phase, there's a control point, and each control point is a decision to be made about whether the programme should stop, pause, or continue. And it's basically about the health of the programme at that stage. And there will be a control point review at each control point, which is chaired by the programme director, and it will look at things like the amount of change that's happening, the amount of risk that the programme's carrying, the suitability of the forward plan, a view on participant readiness, but it will also be a point at which we will refresh our delivery and change strategies and we will assess progress against delivering the programme outcomes which have been documented in the PID. So there's quite a heavy review, but a necessary review to make sure that we are not blindly continuing with the programme that actually requires some adjustment or addressing of key risks before we are to proceed, and that we don't create a bow wave of problems as we take the programme forward. So it's a healthy thing to be doing. Milestones are more familiar devices to you, I would imagine, that provide focus to the delivery activities and an important point of control on delivery progress. And in our working draft of the plan, we've sent you a milestone register. That is only deliberately partially complete. It tells you the milestone names, it tells you the level at which the milestone will be governed, and it also identifies the dependencies between milestones. The rest of the information is deliberately left incomplete at this stage because we would prefer you to focus on the elements of information which are most important at this stage in round one, which are the high level kind of structural elements. On the next slide, we talk about critical path, critical threads. If any of you have been involved in faster switching, you'll know that we introduced this kind of thinking into that programme about midway through. And this is about critical path, which is to go live, and critical threads, which are critical activities between control points. And both of these are important to establish which activities in the plan touch these critical paths or critical threads. These are the activities, if they are to delay, would directly impact the timeline for the programme. So it's important that we get those identified through the plan, and we've done that in later slides. Readiness assessments support the control points, and they are providing an important top-down check on participants' readiness and progress, which we will use to help direct subsequent assurance activities by the SI, but also the SI's assurance activities will help also inform control point conversations based on a more granular assessment of participants' progress and readiness. We're using readiness assessments. It's a fairly standard process we use for that. It's similar to the one used in previous programmes, but we do understand that we need to balance the weight of those questionnaires against the value of the information that we're seeking to collect from you. And therefore, we've always tried to keep the weight of the questionnaire balanced, bearing in mind that most of you need to take your replies through internal governance before you provide them to us. The next section of the deck was about the planning artifacts, just to make sure that you're all aware of the main planning artifacts that you either have received or will be receiving. What we have sent you so far is a PowerPoint document which actually combines the plan on a page and plan on the page for each phase of the programme together with the planning RAID items. So we sent you one document that covered items 1 and 6 on this slide in a summary form, on the basis that when you look at plans on pages, you need to also at the same time look at the RAID items that support the thinking that goes into the delivery approach and the plan on the page. That's the one document you've received. You've also received the programme plan or schedule, which is an Excel document that gives you the detailed activities and durations and sequencing. And as I said earlier, the milestone register. The other items we've deliberately not provided to you because we don't feel that they're helpful to the objectives of round one, which are this kind of high level view of the plan and feedback at that level. But if you want to look at the wider RAID information, of course, you know that you can interrogate the programme RAID log through the portal and the digital PMO, and you can slice and dice the overall programme information there. But this planning RAID information is more the risks and assumptions and issues dependencies that relate to the plan itself. So we've tried to focus in on those to help you with your thinking around your consultation responses. The next section, very briefly, is the hierarchy. We want to just make sure that you're aware of how the plan will be governed and how the plan is linked to the governance forums and decision making. So we've basically set milestone tiers. We're not calling them levels because that was confused with the levels indicated in the governance framework. The tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I won't go through the details, but this slide explains the difference between the tiers and how they're managed. And the second slide in this section basically shows the governance groups The tier 1 milestones are basically governed by our program steering group, unless there are escalations that need to be made to Ofgem based on significant changes to milestones or delays. And then the tier 2 and 3 milestones are governed at the advisory group level, per the previous slide, just for clarity. And the milestone register identifies what milestone is at which tier. Okay, moving on. Basically the labeling system for milestones. This slide just says to you that the milestone name includes the tier, the area of work, and then it's basically done by number. So that's the way in which the milestone register has articulated the milestones. Now we'll move on to the main part of the plan. So the plan we provided you with, and all the artifacts constitute the core part of the plan. This tells you how we're approaching the delivery of the programme. It tells you what obstacles, what potential obstacles, and what areas of uncertainty we see at this point. And it's important to understand that in a planning process, at this stage in the game, we will have a lot of assumptions we're making. There will be a lot of uncertainties, both on our side and on your side. And the whole thing about round 1 is to understand each other's views on those uncertainties and how we might make them more certain as we go through the planning process and into round 2 with a more settled plan. So it's important for us to have this conversation at this level in round 1 through the planning consultation questions. And to remind you, this is a high-level document. These plans are high-level documents to get your views on the structure, the activity sequencing, the durations, and to test the key assumptions and risks. But they're not to focus on the absolute dates, which will be more of the conversation for round 2. On the next slide, we've provided an overall plan on the page for the programme. The replan starts at M5, that's the starting point. The plan accommodates the early activities that we've heard about and we've discussed with the planning volunteers. So, for example, high-level impact assessments and IT procurement activities, etc. Many parties have already either done that work or will be completing that work soon, but we do recognise that some parties won't have started that at this point, and we wanted to legislate and acknowledge the time to undertake those activities. We've outlined participants that may or may not go through SIT. The paths through the plan are slightly different, as Kate will explain in a few minutes' time. So we've articulated a SIT participants path through the programme, a non-SIT participants, and also the central systems, which obviously all go through SIT, but we're also showing that pathway separately. So we've set out the DBT timelines based on reasonable assumptions from the information we've collected from planning volunteers through the planning working group. There are some outliers. There are probably 1 or 2 parties that think it will take a lot longer, and there's 1 or 2 that think it will be quicker. But the median is around these kinds of periods for DBT that we've reflected here. And we have asked questions about how that can be shortened, how the sequences can be overlapped and so on, because the process we've taken till now is what we promised, which was a left to right plan. And this reflects a left to right plan. But the challenge for us through round 1 is to do a right to left pressure test on the plan and to see how we can accelerate timelines, whether it's to put more money, resources, step up more environments. There's lots of ways in which we might seek to make a more efficient delivery than what is essentially a left to right plan. So round 1 is all about trying to understand options to get the dates more to the left than they are currently. And that's why we need your information to back up whether you think that can or can't be done and why you think that. We've taken the back-end systems DBT off the critical path essentially because it's DBT for the systems that basically interface with them MHHS, which are the priority. And therefore, what we've said is that there's a time window by which those DBT activities need to be done. And again, Kate will mention more detail about this later on. We've outlined where qualification testing may start, and to be clear, we think our assumption is qualification testing can happen before the end of SIT, but when certain key parts of SIT have been completed. And we've made assumptions about the qualification window duration, which are based on the Ofgem timetable at the moment, but we want to tease out whether that's a reasonable time window or not. And then the migration and go live approach is based on a set of reasonably arguable assumptions at this stage. There's a lot of work to do to settle on the best way in which this program can go live and migrate. So we've stated some clear assumptions, but they are arguable, and we will be working with a number of parties, including yourselves, to decide whether the assumptions are the most reasonable assumptions to be making at this point. So I'm going to shut up now. That's the kind of intro and the high level. And now I'm going to hand over to Kate, who's going to give a bit more of the detail behind what I've generally described. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Keith. Hi, everybody. Okay, so I'll just go through in a bit more detail what's on this plan on a page, and then we'll drop down to further slides that have got individual activities on them and some assumptions, some risks, and so on articulated. So just to explain, Keith talked about the swim lanes, and then what you've got on the bottom of the page is the what we've called program phases, and in between each one is a control point. And the phases broadly correspond to the activities that are going on in that at that point, but not exactly. The some of the activities, for example, in qualification testing, qualification goes on a little bit into the migration period, but the migration period starts when the first migration begins. And the important thing is that there's a control point at the start of a new phase when we're going into something quite different. So we've got control point 1, which will come up, and that will be the end of the end-to-end design and dropping into the system design and build. And that's system design and build as opposed to end-to-end design. So because it's you guys developing your systems. And then that phase of the program will end when we start systems integration testing, and then that phase will be called integration testing. Now, obviously, there'll still be design and build going on, but we're just for the purposes of naming, we're calling it integration testing phase. And then we've got control point 3, which drops us into qualification testing. And again, that's the qualification is the phase. We are still going to be doing some sit into that, but the main focus will be on qualification at that point. And similarly, control point 4 drops us into the migration phase, even though qualification is still going on, some sandbox testing may be going on, but that's the migration phase. Along the top, we've got the milestones, and these are the milestones M5, M3, M9, and so on. These are the same as those articulated in the Ofgem transition timetable. So let's have a look first of all at what a participant, the sort of the journey of a participant who's undergoing SIT. So what we've put in the plan is that there'll be an initial piece of work that all participants will undergo, which is to do with impact assessing the design. Now, many, particularly in your community, many have already done that to a large degree, but the final design will come out on Monday, and you'll have some work to do impact assessing the final design. There'll be planning to do, and procurement on the part of suppliers, not so much on your side, obviously, but there'll be a number of activities over a number of months. And the indications we got from the planning work group was that the planning activity would take about 4 months. And so we've said, okay, well, maybe procurement activities carry on, but once you've done the planning, suppliers, you can, excuse me, and service providers and software providers, you can get on with your design, build and test. So after 4 months, you can see the critical path dropping down into what we've called DBT of market interfaces and DBT of services. And the reason we've called that out separately as Keith said, is that it's really to do with what do we want to enter SIT. So bearing in mind that SIT, Systems Integration Test, is going to be a test of the end-to-end MHHS design and the systems that are going to operate within MHHS to make sure that they operate according to the design and that the design is effective and coherent and holds together. Now, it's end-to-end in the sense of MHHS. It's not end-to-end in the sense of, for example, a supplier systems, because a supplier systems will have billing and sales and all the rest of it, which are not part of our SIT. And we've called those back-end systems. Now, obviously, changes to those are important, and we need to get a handle on if those changes have been made and if they will adequately support MHHS, but we'll come on to that in a minute. So the initial thing is to get enough of the components ready and changed in time to put together a complete landscape of components with hopefully a couple of components in each space. So, you know, we would love to have a couple of smart data services, a couple of advanced, and so on and so forth, in order to go through SIT. We've allowed 12 months for the design, build and test of the interfaces and the services. And that, again, that came from the planning working group, where the general indication was that that sort of time frame was adequate. But again, you know, we really want your input on all of this. Then we've got SIT, which we've said will take 18.5 months. And one of the things that we're going to be doing over the next few weeks before we get to consultation round 2 is validating the length of time that we think it will take to do SIT. And you know, one of the things that we're doing is we are shining a bit more of a light on the design of MHHS to try to gauge its size and complexity in comparison with faster switching, for example, because we've got good statistics on how long faster switching took. We also know where potentially, you know, we can do things in a different way that might take less time and so on. And we need to put all of that together and revalidate our 18.5 months. We've got what we've said about SIT participants is that when SIT has got to a certain stage, we will allow participants we'll open up the end-to-end sandbox, which will be the user integration test, the UIT environment. We'll open that up to SIT participants so that any of you guys who wish to carry on further testing of your own things which are outside the scope of SIT can do so if you've successfully completed SIT up to that point. And that would go on in parallel with some residual SIT activities. You probably wouldn't be required to carry on testing till the very end of SIT shown on here. But because I think one of the last things in there would be operational testing, and that's most likely to be just us as the SI with the DIP provider, and that participants more widely wouldn't be expected to test in that. So you've got a bit of SIT and sandbox going on in parallel, and then you can carry on with sandbox, and then eventually we drop down to the third swim lane, which is preparation for the cutover to live for advanced and unmetered. And then you've got preparation for cutover to live for smart, and then you go live on advanced and unmetered, and then slightly later 2 months later go live with smart. Now I'll come and talk about this migration and the way in which we've represented the go live in the plan, because there's quite a few nuances around that. So I'll come to that in a minute. So before we do that, let's have a look at the non-SIP participants. So they have a similar planning period and then dropping into design, build and test. And we've represented here that there's interface and services in the same way as for the SIP participants, followed by back end. Now, it doesn't really have to be quite as rigid as that. The main thing is that the development needs to be complete such that a participant can get into qualification and can exit it in time to go live at the appropriate point. One of the things that we need to do again over the coming weeks and months is we've got to do a lot of work on SIP participation. So we've had some indication from parties who say that they would like to participate in SIP. So if your organisation is thinking they might like to participate, we'd love to hear from you. You can either contact the PMO or in fact you could contact me direct. One of the things we need to do is we need to make sure that we're very clear about what's required for SIP participation and what that will get you. One of the things that it will sort of get you is that you don't have to do qualification. It will be considered to be the equivalent of qualification. And it obviously gets you into the sandbox a bit earlier, because you can see that if you go the qualification route, the sandbox opens up to you slightly after the beginning of qualification, assuming that you've qualified in the early part of that, and then you get into the sandbox as soon as you've qualified. Okay, so a little bit more about qualification. So there are quite a lot of questions that really need to be answered about qualification, and we're standing up the qualification working group whose first meeting is next Tuesday, and that group will be tasked with answering these questions. And I think one of the first things the group will have to do is draw out a plan of what's the most urgent question and when it's going to be answered, and come up with a prioritized list of how they're going to tackle all these issues. So let me first tell you some of the thinking that we've got about qualification, and then I'll go on to some of the questions that we've got. So qualification is going to be a sort of a cooperative piece of work mainly between ourselves as the programme SI and the BSc PAB. And the way the thinking has gone so far, it's that the BSc PAB will run qualification. So it will be the PAB who will give people a tick in the box to say, yes, you can get into qualification, yes, you've got out of it, all of that sort of thing. But it will be the MHHS programme that will define what is required of a participant in qualification. And obviously we need to do that in conjunction with the BSc PAB. So we're talking to the PAB. I mean, there are further elements because SEC and REC are also implicated. So we need to take all that into account and talk to those code bodies as well. But that's how it's going to work out, that we do the definition, that BSc PAB run and manage the process of qualification as they do at the moment. And that qualification will involve some procedural things, as at the moment, demonstrating processes and procedures. And it will also involve some actual testing, where we will want you to test on the UIT environment in the same kind of way as there was a UEPT on faster switching and on smart metering. So again, the thinking about what qualification consists of is, at the moment, it's as follows. But again, it's for the qualification working group to work this out. And I think this is all the working groups obviously have important work to do, but qualification is particularly important because it affects pretty much everybody, and it's very important to get it right. So please join in the working group next week if you can, and attend as many as you can. If you wish to do so, then you just need to email the PMO, which is pmo@mhhsprogram.co.uk, and they will sort out your attendance. So at the moment, what we think about qualification is that it's going to have three parts. The first part will be requiring you in your PIT, or what we call PIT, you know, in your build and test, requiring you to do certain things and evidence certain things. And then the BSc PAB will review that evidence and say, yes, you're good to go, or ask you to repeat certain things and re-evidence. And once you're good to go, you drop into the second part, which is actually using the UIT environment to do some tests, again, that we have specified, but that will be managed by the BSc PAB. And it's likely at this point that there'll be some form of tranching, because we just don't have systems with capacity for a complete free-for-all. And the tranching system for UEPT worked very well on the switching program, and we will do something similar. But again, we don't know exactly what. We don't know whether we will mandate who goes in which tranche, or whether it will be first come, first served. All of that, again, decisions for the qualification working group to make. So there will be some testing to do. That's the second part. And that testing will essentially be verifying the interfaces and that the metering data services and so on are working in an adequate way. What we would like to do as the third part, and again, we're not sure exactly what form this will take, is to verify somehow the back-end systems to make sure that, and this is much more for suppliers really. So suppliers' back-end systems, have they been changed? Are they adequate to support MHHS? What about their processes? Are they adequate to support MHHS? And you know, we'll be shining a light on particular things that are relevant to MHHS. For example, what are the processes around the error processing, error handling for when an MPAN fails to be migrated because there's something wrong with the data? How do you go about repairing that and resolving all that? So you've got the three parts to qualification is the idea at the moment. And the third part, with the demonstration of some of the back end things, you know, again, up for grabs really, whether that's demonstrated on the UIT system in the sandbox, or whether it's demonstrated on your systems in a standalone way. We need to talk about all that. And it may be that you have the choice in, the suppliers have the choice in how they demonstrate it. So that's qualification and our thinking so far. So some of the questions, we've talked about them as we've gone along, but the other questions are things like, there's a very fundamental thing to be answered, which is this qualification or is it re-qualification? And there are opinions both ways at the moment. We're not really sure. So that's pretty much top of the list of what we've got to do. The other thing that we need to look at is, what is the unit that qualifies? So for example, does a whole smart data service have to qualify as a lump? Because potentially there are various components within that. Or can each component qualify separately? And if so, how do you supply the other components that allow it to do its qualification testing and demonstrate that it's working properly? So there are a lot of questions around this, and there'll be a lot of work that needs to be done over the next few months in that working group. I haven't talked yet about the central systems. So the central systems, they're just represented here as a single line. Obviously, they're very distinct. And what we've put on here is a date when they go live, which is M10, which is a month earlier than the advanced and unmetered cutover. And that's really to allow a bit of a shakedown following their go live, a bit of stability before those two segments have all their participants cut over to live. Now, again, because they're distinct systems, some have development which is well underway, others don't. What we've put here is the last date on which we expect them to go live. We fully expect that many would be live earlier and their MHHS features would not be exercised until the advanced and unmetered go live, which is absolutely fine. But this M10 is there to represent the latest date that we would expect systems to go live. And if you go into the more detailed plan in the Excel spreadsheet, you'll see that we've got timetables for each of the central systems. So then going into the third swim lane, the cutover and go live and migration. So just one thing to be very clear about this, the cutover to live, when the systems go live, when advanced and unmetered, for example, which we've put down here as going live first, when they go live, what that means is that there will then be the capability to take on new MPANs under the new arrangements. It doesn't mean that MPANs will already be there. That's what the migration period's about. So the migration period is once you've gone live and you've got the capability to use the new arrangements, bit by bit over the migration period, over the 13 months for advanced and unmetered and 11 for smart, over that period, MPANs are migrated from the old arrangements to the new. And then finally, we get to M15, which is all MPANs migrated, and M16 is 2 months later than that, and that means going on to the new settlement timetable. So what we've assumed about migration for the purposes of this plan is something, it's another of the things that we're working on actively at the moment. And the assumptions that we've made for this are very likely to change. And I'll explain a bit why that is. So on migration, there was a huge amount of really good work done last year, and I think possibly also some the year before, about by CCDG about how migration should be handled. And then the other piece of information about migration was the Ofgem transition timetable, which showed the sequence of events that was expected at the start of at the start of MHHS going live. So the CCDG recommendations had advanced and unmetered going live before smart, and we've respected that. And I think at least one of the reasons was that MHHS induced change is much less in advanced and unmetered than it is in smart. Smart data services in particular, that's a big change in respect of MHHS. So we've got that. One of the things that the CCDG assumed was that once an MPAN has been migrated onto the new arrangements, that there would be no possibility for it to be reversed back to the old arrangements. Now, the way that the Ofgem transition timetable was constructed was that there was a period of 3 or 4 months at the beginning of the migration period where at the beginning of that 4 months, participants could go live with their systems and could start migrating. And at the end of the 4 months is M14, when all participants have to be live with their new systems and capable of taking on new MPANs, either as new registrations or as switches, taking on new MPANs under the new arrangements. So during that period, according to the Ofgem transition timetable, you'd have a situation where some participants are on the new arrangements. Sorry, some participants are capable of handling MPANs on the new arrangements and others are not capable. And so you could in theory get, well, you could in practice get the situation where an MPAN is migrated onto the new arrangements, say with supplier A, who's got very ahead of the game, and then the consumer wants to switch to supplier B, who's not yet on the new arrangements. And in order to do that, you'd have to reverse the migration essentially in order to get onto supplier B. Now, there's currently no mechanism for that in the design. And there's a concern from some of our stakeholders that if that phased approach happens and there is no reverse, then there would be an unacceptable restriction on consumer choice during that period where some participants are live on the new arrangements and others are not. So for that reason, what we've done in the plan is we've gone with an approach which we think will change, which is to say that in a given segment, all participants go live on the same day with the new arrangements. So that avoids having this idea of people coming on and some being on the new arrangements in a given segment and others not. It's consistent with the existing design. For very many reasons, it's probably not where we're going to end up. So one of the things that we're looking at is potentially adding into the design the capability for doing this reverse migration. And that would mean that during the period up until from the first go live leading up until M14, that it's possible to switch to any supplier and you can switch onto the new arrangements and back off them and back onto them and whatever you need to do. And there's no restriction on consumer choice. So we're actively looking at that. Our assumptions may well change in the next round. So we would be very interested to hear from you. There's a consultation question about this. We'd be interested to hear from you what your views are on this, because there are very many reasons why some kind of phased go live would be important from the point of view of making sure that, you know, it's easier for people if there's a window in which they can go live rather than trying to get everybody live in a given segment on a particular date. The other thing that we are doing some due diligence on in the next few weeks is how long migration is going to take. So we've put down 13 months for advanced and unmetered and 11 for smart. We need to, and that's kind of respecting the existing Ofgem transition timetable where migration takes 12 months overall. We need to validate that, and in order to do that, we're going to look at some of the recent solars because some of those have been really quite large, and also if we know of a supplier that's undergone a big migration by effectively doing a change of supplier, changing it onto a different MPID, then we'll use statistics from that as well. And you know, the trying to manage the migration period will be quite complex, and that's something that the SI will have to do, because it would be very easy if people were allowed to migrate in an unconstrained way. It would be easy to blow up an MPRS, for example, I mean, currently the limit is set on a supplier of the number of switches in a day as 20,000 unless special provision is made. So the other thing is that obviously for you guys, you know, you don't want your systems blown up because all of a sudden you've experienced a huge peak that you didn't realize about. So, you know, balancing across the whole of the ecosystem is going to be something that's really important and that needs to be done, you know, in a way that gives suppliers a bit of latitude, but also smooths things out and ensures that it's a smooth migration. Okay, I think that's it for that diagram. So let's go and have a look at some of the more detailed stuff and some of the risks and so on. So what you've got here, this is an extract from the Excel, and I'll just explain what's in this. You've got a column on the left which is the task, and here all we've got is the highest level tasks. If you look on the Excel itself, you'll see a lot more detail. And then what we've got in the first column is when does this activity, when does this task start relative to M5? M5, bearing in mind, is the end of October. So, and this is expressed in how many months after the end of October does this activity start. And then the next column, same thing, but for when this activity finishes. So it's the number of months after M5 that this activity finishes. So you can see on the first one, program replan baseline, that starts at M5 and it finishes 3 months, well, 2.9. The software's worked it out automatically. It's a bit imprecise, but essentially 3 months after it starts and a duration of 2.9 months. So that's how to interpret these. You can see in this one that there's mobilization, impact assessment, planning, and so on goes on, and that's on the critical thread. And then that drops into DBT. And then there's some SIT preparation, and then it drops into the integration phase. Next one, Danielle, please. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll pick out a few things on the issues, assumptions, and risks. Okay, so we're talking here about transition design in the first issue. What I should say is that in the migration working group, we're trying to make sure that everybody standardizes on terminology, and it's something that we need, you know, it's going to take a little time across the whole program. The CCDG laid out a very clear definition of what was migration and what was transition, and sometimes the two are used interchangeably, and we need to make sure that we're aligning properly going forward. So migration is that period at the end that you've seen on the POAP we were just discussing, where MPANs are being migrated from the old arrangements to the new. That's the migration. Transition is moving from where we are now all the way up to the new settlement timetable having come in. In other words, transition encompasses the migration period, it encompasses migration, but there's more to it. And in particular, ahead of migration, there are some activities that need to be done, like data items need adding to MPRS. There's some data cleansing to be done. After it, there's the preparation. After migration, there's the preparation for going live on the new arrangement. So transition is wider than migration. Design for transition and migration is coming along following M5. So the design team are going to be, they already have a pretty good idea of, in outline, of what the design of migration is in terms of de-appointing agents under the old regime, appointing agents under the new regime, and so on. that is all going to be crystallized as soon as is possible. And then if we go down to the key assumptions, you guys know that you are responsible for PIT. And the third one, no dip environment will be provided ahead of getting into SIT. Well, that is true. It's also true that we're going to supply you with some tools which we believe should help you with your testing. So there's 2 of those that we envisage providing in PIT, in your PIT, where you're doing your own standalone testing. What these are is something to simulate the interface between a data service and LSS, and between a data service and MDS. And the other thing is a generator of data in large quantities for either smart or advanced. We're not doing unmetered because that's the unmetered agents have got that covered very well already. So we're not doing that. But so what we're doing in terms of simulating the dip, we will provide something that acts as if it's LSS. So when you you have an interaction with the dip, and you're sending consumption data to LSS, we'll have a piece of software that will act in a relatively simple way. We're not implementing the whole dip, obviously, but we're implementing enough that for it to be realistic to test against, that you can send messages and we will send back an error if their format's incorrect, and so on. So it will look like a simple version of the dip, and that's for LSS and MDS. And then we're looking at the possibility of expanding that out so that we provide a similar thing for many of the other dip interfaces. On the test data generator, that's intended to just be generating data, not actually providing a mechanism for you to pass that data into your systems, but it's data that would sort of come in from the top of the architecture diagram into a data service, a smart or advanced. And it would be a case of it would be a tool where you provide us with a list of MPANs, and you provide us with other relevant information like meter technical details. You tell us what the last consumption figure was and when it was and things like that. And then our tool will generate realistic consumption data that you can then use. And it'll be generated in a relatively simple form. So we're just looking at, we're starting work on the dip simulation at the moment, and we're starting to think about the data generator, but we haven't started designing that yet. And those will be available in a reasonable time frame, such that they will be of use to you in your design, build, and test. Next slide, Danielle. Okay, so this is where integration testing starts. So in other words, SIT starts. So you've got a single line for SIT execution here. If you actually go into the Excel, then that's broken down into the various SIT stages. So it's quite useful, I think, to go in and see those. And you can see the sequence they're in and how long they are. And this runs on through SIT until qualification starts. And then SIT will run on afterwards, but it's the start of the qualification phase. Yeah, next slide, please. So looking again at the issues, assumptions, and risks. SIT is on the critical path, yes, and we are validating the duration. We haven't got firm idea of who is going to do SIT. SIT will be coordinated and managed by us, but obviously, you and other participants, as the as the owners of the systems, will have to do the testing you know, in a managed and coordinated way. We've had people indicating potential interest, but as I said before, if you are thinking about this, please talk to us, because, you know, we really want to now, from now on, start opening up conversations about this with anybody who's interested. I think that's probably about it, actually. I think the other things we've covered. So next one. Qualification. Okay, so you can see that SIT carries on a bit, and then qualification is going on. And that ends when, so this phase ends when the 1 year migration period for unmetered and advanced starts. Next. Okay, roles and responsibilities for management of qualification testing. Yeah, we talked about this. We are talking to the BSc tab, and we do need to continue talking to them, and all of those conversations will be aired in the qualification working group. We're looking to validate the length of time we need for qualification, and we'll do that either time we release a new version of the plan for the second round of consultation. Yeah, and I think that's about it. I think we've covered everything else. Migration. So you can see that we go live with advanced and unmetered, and then we go live with smart, and run through the migration leading up to control point 5, or in other words, milestone 15, which is when all MPANs have been migrated. What we haven't got on this diagram, but you did see on the POAP, is the final step, which is M16, which is we have moved on to the new settlement timetable. Go down, please. Okay, so the issues around migration and the CCGG, the issues with what was proposed by the CCDG in terms of restriction of consumer choice. We've talked about those. On the assumptions, we've talked about the fact that we are looking at reverse migration, and whether in fact that might be a, you know, there are possibly other ways of dealing with this, but we're looking at reverse migration to see if that might be a sensible way of going. And I think all of the other things we've covered, really. Okay, so I think that's it. And I think at this point, handing back to Keith.
Okay, okay. So I guess I would just one last slide on this pack, actually, which is just to remind you that anybody who's having trouble with acronyms, as I sometimes do, there is on the portal a fairly well-established and interactive program glossary, which we established quite early on in the program and it's developed over time. So if there's any questions you have about acronyms, I suggest you, I highly recommend you go and look at that. And so you can see that based on what Kate and I've been saying, that now we could have at this stage not shared this information with you in this way. We could have waited until we had more certainty about some of the items, but to be honest with you, we wanted, as I said at the beginning, to involve you as early as possible upstream in this activity and build this plan with you. That means we have to be honest and transparent about what we do and don't know at this stage, and what we don't know is quite understandably what we don't know at this stage. Your consultation responses will help us provide an evidence base for the thinking that you have. It will help our thinking. It will help us continue our due diligence on trying to establish more certainty in some of these areas. Your input will help us with that. And also you need to think about your own uncertainties and respond to the consultation questions as you are able. We're not expecting in a 4-week timeline with that many questions for you to be able to answer every question perfectly. In fact, we absolutely expect that you will have areas of assumption that you're making, but if you share with us through the consultation questions where your thinking's at, including honestly and transparently what you don't know at this point, or what you're trying to work out, or what you need to know from us, that's really very helpful as well. So we realise that the plan's not perfect, your responses won't be perfect either at this stage, but the more information you can give us about what you do and don't know, and what you're doing about it, and what options you see to improve the timelines. As I said at the beginning, it might be adding more resources, spending more money, standing up more environments, all these kinds of things that might help us deliver the programme more efficiently and more rapidly. All of these things are things that we want to hear from you about through the consultation questions. So that's why we've asked you that many questions. That's why we need you to make the effort this round, because after that, the ability to influence this conversation and the plan becomes less over time. So at this stage, we wanted to kind of reinforce those messages and hand over to anybody who would like to ask questions. We said we'd leave the last 20 minutes or so for people to raise hands and ask questions on a first come, first served basis. I think it's that time now. So if anybody has any questions, we'd be very happy to hear from you at this stage. Or not, as it might happen, but we'll see what happens. There's usually the first one that breaks the ceiling and goes first. Oh, also, it looks like we have a question in the chat because there's no audio. Matt has asked, can an agent participate in SIT for a various role without the need for a supplier business partner?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we don't yet know. I think, you know, the answer's got to be yes. We've got to facilitate that somehow. You know, I think when it comes to qualification, it's a bit more difficult, but I think for SIT, we've basically got to allow this to happen, because I know that many of you will be very keen to participate in SIT to get your solutions validated as early as possible. So without being able to say categorically yes, I would say, yeah, you know, we've got to do it, really.
I would ask the question in the consultation question responses you give us, because there's an opportunity for us then to write back a response to you. We have some kind of you know, written dialogue, documented conversation about these kinds of things. So I would put it in the questions and we will respond in kind. Thank you, Matt.
So,
I think we have.
Again, yes, sorry, Keith. Matt, what would be very helpful is that, you know, is any of you thinking about it, please contact us, because the sooner that we can get a picture of, you know, we've got that somebody's interested in this component and SIT, somebody's interested here, that we can start piecing together where we've got interested parties, that would be really helpful.
Great, thank you, Kate. I think Paul has her hand up now. Yeah, thank you. I would have beat Matt to it, but my Teams was half frozen. So well done, Matt, for getting in there on the chat. So appreciate there's a lot of detail to fill in. Yeah. Which does make some of this a bit difficult. But you mentioned that the DIP environment wouldn't be available for participants' own testing, which was the bit just before SIT. So yes, will DIP be available in SIT?
Yes, absolutely. So it will be available in SIT. It will be available in UIT for qualification and sandbox. Absolutely.
And I don't think I've seen any detail on how you actually become connected to the DIP, what the timeframes are around that.
The timeframes I'm not sure about, but in terms of, I understand that one of the things released with the design is a code of connection, so that there are things out there in the design saying what you need to do. Now, the PKI is not firmed up yet, so that is a missing piece. But other than the PKI, I understand that most of the information should be there in the design.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know where it lives at the moment, but yeah, it hasn't come out in my direction. So yeah, okay. just wondering how, you know, because you need to be able to connect to the DIP and go through whatever
technical connection process you need to go through to be able to enter into the SIT process.
Yeah, totally. So, all right, a little bit about SIT, and then I'll talk about what we're doing to publicise the design. So, the SIT process. So, what we're doing in SIT is SIT starts with a 3-month what we've called component integration, and that's there in order to piece by piece put the jigsaw puzzle together. So we're very much not trying to do what faster switching did, which was everybody turn up and we'll put, we'll plug it all in all together. So we're starting with the DIP, because obviously, as you say, you can't do anything without that. So we're starting with the DIP. We're going to plug in Elexon Central Systems, make sure that's all working, then plug in the data services and sort of keep on working outwards from the DIP, if you like, on the architecture diagram until we've got it all there. So what we're trying to do is we're not looking to do extensive connectivity tests ahead of time. Obviously, we've got to do some kind of connectivity because we don't want to get to day one where we're intending to plug your system in and get nowhere at all. But when we are, we're trying to make that part of the testing, getting all those problems ironed out as actually the first part of real SIT, rather than having them kind of orphaned in a non-test phase and it's a prerequisite, and it just makes life difficult like that. So we want to do it in a much more controlled manner, shall we say? Does that make sense in terms of?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
Where can I find that information to help me assess the plan?
The stuff about that, I mean, this again, this is developing, but there's an end-to-end testing and integration strategy which talks about this, and it outlines the different stages in SIT and what they're all about and so on. So you can find that on the website, and you can also find it on the collaboration base. It should be quite easy to find on the website under TMAG, I think.
Yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah, I probably need to go and read it again in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I mean, it is a strategy, it is the high level stuff, but that's essentially what, it does talk about that and about how we're doing that integration. So there's that. And then the other thing, we are in parallel with these meetings, we're doing a lot of meetings about the design and how you can get into the design. And I think those would be helpful if you say that you're not aware of where to go for the DIP connectivity information, then I think start with those design sessions. And Simon Harrison did a really good intro session this morning, which is on our YouTube channel, which kind of leads you through the design docs and how you can get into them. And there's some really nice diagrams online that show the solution diagram, and then it shows which artifacts relate to each bit of the solution and things like that, and it's all laid out quite nicely.
I'll take another look, and if I can't find it, I'll let you know.
Yeah, do just get hold of the PMO, because they can point you in the right direction. But those, so I believe there should be a link to the YouTube channel on the website. So if you go into the website, have a poke around, hopefully you should be able to find what you need. Otherwise, get hold of us.
Okay, thank you. The other question I've got is about qualification, and you talked about the program liaising with BSc PAB, but a lot of us are metering agents as well as data collectors.
I appreciate that. So we do need to take into account SEC and REC as well, and we understand that. I think a lot of the content is going to be dictated by the BSc, but no, we do appreciate that. One of the things that we've got, and you might not have seen it because this was I think this went into the latest edition of the end-to-end testing strategy. There's a table in there which shows for each role what our understanding of the codes that are relevant are. And you'll see in that obviously if you're a metering agent, then that BSc is not relevant, but SEC is, for example.
Yes, yes. And what we're hoping for is a coordinated approach across
Exactly. So
across all of the governance arrangements.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we're doing. So that I think that's the thinking behind having us as a programme doing that coordination and specifying what needs to be done to qualify. But then the qualification would be run by the PAB. Now we may find that you know, qualification will be run as per the SEC for you guys, you know, because the BSc isn't relevant. So we do need to bottom all of that out, but we're aware that we need to look at the other codes as well.
Thank you.
Okay, any other hands while we're still around? I'll say it's a lot to take in, and if on reflection you do come up with questions, you can either contact the PMO or be aware that we have a couple of drop-in sessions on Monday, which are basically just where we're available for people to just turn up and ask questions that occur to them from any constituency. So we have those kind of backstop meetings or sessions on Monday, which you might want to join if you think of questions between now and then, or as I say, just contact the PMO and they'll basically point the question at the right person in the team to answer it. So we'll do it that way as well. But if anybody wants to put a hand up now, or we'll otherwise allow the session to close.
I should say though that some of us are going on holiday very soon, so depending on what the question is, yeah,
we'll find somebody to answer it if
we will. Yeah.
But anyway, we appreciate your time today, and we hope it's been
really appreciate
useful. Yeah. Okay. We've got one hand. Oh no, it's a thumbs up. That was good. Well, thank you, Matt.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Good. Have a good weekend,
Guys.
everybody. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much. You
Bye.
too. Bye.
Bye.